bad.
So analysts argue that as baby boomers reach the age of 50, they will begin seriously planning for retirement. This will lead them to switch from being primarily consumers to being savers. Thus, the analysts conclude more money will flow into the stock market, resulting in continued gains in stock price. Analysts would stand to gain if this were true, but they are being overly optimistic. As consumption decreases, so will corporate earnings. Therefore, high stock prices will not be justified, and thus boomers' money will more likely flow into investments other than stocks.
All right, so what is the columnist's conclusion here?
That these analysts are being overly optimistic.
Yes. And so okay, so we have our conclusion, and then we go on to we say like the columnist argument does which of the following. So this is a reasoning question.
Yeah.
So we want to pre-phrase what does the columnist do to get to this conclusion? And so we really want to pay attention to our premises on reasoning questions. And so really it says, as consumption decreases, so will corporate earnings, therefore high stock prices will not be justified. And thus boomers' money will more likely flow into investments other than stocks. So what is that essentially doing for our conclusion?
It's supporting how they're being overly optimistic because they were trying to say that more money will flow into the stock market.
Yes, and they're saying these analysts conclude more money will flow into the stock market, resulting in continued gains in stock prices. So we're saying this is overly optimistic, and and then how do we show that they're overly optimistic?
I guess kind of showing like like a domino effect.
Yeah, or like an alternative, like you can't, like it's almost like you can't just assume that the stock prices are going to go up. It's more so like the money is just going to flow into investments other than stocks.
Yeah.
We kind of show like, hey, you're just assuming that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I guess what was a little tricky for me was, so they're being overly optimistic, but I couldn't tell if the author was saying like you're 100% wrong or you're kind of right and you're kind of wrong, because when you go into the question answers, it's kind of like there's a mix of both.
When I say overly optimistic, I feel like he's saying that it's not guaranteed. It's not that it might not be true, but it's not guaranteed. Okay. I feel like it's like I'm like raising my eyebrows at it. But let's go ahead and start with A and tell me love it, leave it, or hate it for A.
So he attempts to undermine the analyst's argument by questioning the truth of its premise. Yeah, he's not questioning the truth, I don't think, of the premise of
whenever we question the truth of the premise, we say like what you're using as support isn't accurate.
Mm-hmm. I guess your rephrasing of that could be, so I would leave it because he's being overly optimistic.
Yeah, I'm thinking thus these, I actually have to go find what their premises are. Thus they conclude more money will flow into the stock market, resulting in continued gains in stock prices. Analysts argue that baby boomers will reach the age of 50. They will begin seriously planning for retirement. This will lead them to switch from being primarily consumers to being savers. Like this is a premise here, but I don't think our issue is with this premise, right? Like our issue isn't that they're not going to be savers. Our thing is like these analysts conclude more money will flow into the stock market, which will have gains in stock prices. A consumption decrease, so will corporate earnings. Therefore, we're not.
It doesn't.
Yeah, we agree with what they're saying, but we don't think the impact. Like you're like
how they're doing it, right?
You think it's going to be great that they're switching to savings, and we're saying it actually could hurt the economy because they're not going to be, the consumption's going to decrease. Mm-hmm. So we're not. Yeah, so we definitely don't question the truth of the premise.
So B says attempts to undermine the analyst's argument by suggesting that the analyst's present it for self-serving reasons. No, that's wrong because it's not
Yeah,
for
we don't
self-serving.
say like, and I think when people pick this answer, they're like, well, but the analysts have a self-serving reason to do it. They might, but the columnist doesn't point out that self-serving reason. So that's
Yeah.
not what we do. Excellent. All right. What about C?
So attempts to undermine the analyst's argument by drawing an alternative conclusion from the analyst's premise. An alternative conclusion. Um, no, because it's not from the analyst's premise. So that's why I would say C is wrong.
Okay, I actually don't hate C personally because
Okay.
attempts to undermine by drawing an alternative conclusion. Okay,
Conclusion from his premise, though.
because so we're saying that more money will flow into the stock market, resulting in continued gains in stock prices. We agree with this. Well, we agree. Sorry, we agree with the first half. We agree that more money is going to go into the stock market, but we're saying that like while there might be more money in the stock market, as consumption decreases, so will corporate earnings. Therefore, high stock prices will not be justified, and they'll more likely flow into investments other than stocks. So I feel like we're saying that they think that because they're going to serve the analysts think that because the consumers are switching from being consumers to savers, it's going to have gains in stocks. Well, we're saying that it's actually going to lead to a
I see what you're saying.
yeah. So I don't hate C.
So it's kind of using their premise, just coming up with a different
Yeah, we're
conclusion.
saying like while that's true, we don't think it's going to result in the thing that you're being overly optimistic about because all these companies are going to lose that consumption, and so their corporate earnings are going to decrease, and it actually might be bad.
Because I thought the columnists are using their own premise. Because after the being overly optimistic part, the rest of it is like,
Well, I think we still use well we use an addition, we use more premises, but we still use this premise here,
got it. Okay.
right?
I
Because it's
see.
what the whole thing is based on.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we leave C then. D says argues that the analyst's conclusion is basically right, but suggests that it is somewhat too optimistic. And if
This,
I remember, say again.
is this the one that you picked?
Probably, and it's probably a trap answer because it says too optimistic.
Oh yeah, and I'm thinking like argues. Do we? I don't know if we argue that they're basically right. I don't think we say if they're right or not. We just say they're being overly. Actually, we're saying they're being like this would stand if this were true, but I don't think we think this is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically right. Like I don't.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not enough to say that they're basically right.
Yeah, like they could also be basically wrong. Like you could
Yeah,
be over. Yeah,
that's
that's
true.
definitely a trap answer.
Yeah, I think that's what I went with.
All right, and
Um,
about E.
it says argues in favor of the analyst's conclusion, but does so on the basis of a different body of evidence. So it doesn't. It's against what the analyst's conclusion is about because it says they're being overly optimistic.
So if this were the right answer, like, and what would have to be happening for this to be the correct answer in an argument? Like you don't have to use this argument. Like just like what does this answer choice look like?
Um, it's agreeing with the conclusion, but it's bringing in other evidence. It's like
Yeah, like it's saying like
yeah,
I agree with you, but
not for the reason that you gave
yes,
for.
excellent. You will see you'll see that sometimes as well.